What kind of weapons did you work with?
At the start, the exact same ones you had in Vietnam. 50 cal, 30 cal machine gun.
M16 and 9mm pistol.
Had a same Browning 9mm pistol.
Really?
We had the exact same vehicles, same guns, same everything.
This says something about the Australian Army, that 30, 40 years later, we're still using exactly the same weapons where the rest of the world had moved on.
Yeah. Okay, Chris.
G'day, Ben. How are you?
Not too bad, mate. Yourself?
Good, thanks. These are hard questions. Where did you serve and how old were you?
I enlisted when I was 18 and went straight to B Squadron 3-4 Cav Regiment in Townsville, and then served for just under 19 years. Deployed to East Timor in 99 and Iraq in 2006.
Oh.
And what about yourself, mate?
Well, my experience is totally different. I was teaching in a one-teacher school out in outback New South Wales, and I'd totally forgotten about conscription. And the postman walked into the school and he had a thick khaki envelope, and he said, "You're in trouble." And he stood this far away from me, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I want to see you open it." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I want to tell the next 10 homesteads your reaction." And it was I was conscripted. And you had 2 years jail or 2 years in the army. And so I got conscripted and went in and became an officer and then in cavalry. So I only did 2 years conscription in Vietnam. And but then after, I took a while to settle down, so I went back into the education corps for 3 years as a captain. And by then, about 9 years later, I was okay and went back into Civvy Street.
Right.
Different to you.
Yeah, a bit different, mate. No show. How do you feel about sharing your stories?
When I came back from Vietnam, I went to the University of New South Wales, and I was spat on by the tutor in a sociology tute, and another Vietnam vet and I, Danny Holmes, we used to walk around the quadrangle at the University of New South Wales, and the students used to boo and hiss us as we walked around. So for the first 30 years, I barely told anybody I was a Vietnam veteran. And it took probably 40 years before a tradie in the house, somehow it came up, I was a Vietnam veteran, and he said, "You're a veteran," and I thought, "Oh, here we go," and he shook my hand and thanked me, and I burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
Even my family hadn't thanked me for 40 years, so now I'm much more open about it because the things have changed. If you go to Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, there's young people everywhere. But in my day, if you let people know you're a Vietnam veteran, you're making yourself a target.
When were you most afraid?
The difference with American soldiers, they would get conscripted, and after 6 weeks training, they were in Vietnam. Well, in my case, and I think like you, I did recruit training for 2 weeks, then I did officer training for 6 months, then I did armoured officer training for 6 months, then I did another 6 months training with my regiment. So by the time I went to Vietnam, I was so well trained that I never had a situation where I was truly scared. I was so well trained and having to give orders that, and I'm not brave, but I was just too busy to, afterwards I guess you think how close it was, but during contacts and mines and things, fear wasn't a factor. I just seemed too busy.
I think for me it was Iraq was the roadside bombs because you could do nothing about it. And they were updated from your era, from Vietnam, into different ways of setting them off by mobile phones or passive infrared sensors. You could trip it like a door, and they were just prolific. And so every time you went outside on a patrol, you had to face those things, and that became, I think I became afraid of those in the end because of how dangerous and how powerful they were.
So that's maybe the thing about fear. If you think you have some control over what you're doing, I think you're less vulnerable to fear. But if it's not random and they're targeting you with technology, I think that would have been entirely different for us as well. I think that would be far more difficult, knowing that they were watching you from a kilometre or two away and they could detonate it at will. That would be very different. We didn't face that. If the question had been, instead of fear, it had been sadness, I knelt over a soldier we'd killed and opened his wallet, and it had a picture of he and his wife and about an 8-year-old daughter. And that still haunts me, because we'd been taught, when we were desensitised and dehumanised the enemy, we were taught they were slopes and nogs and Kong, etc. And he was a young dad and a young husband who just killed. And that sadness has remained with me, but it's very different to fear, of course.
I had a similar experience in Timor. From Dili to the western border, they'd removed all the iron off the roofs, so no one could have a house, no one had protection from the weather. So a simple way of terrorising the population was to remove the roofs of all the buildings. And so they basically herded everyone into refugee camps on the western side of the border. And so you just think, what a tactic of terror that they were doing, and just you felt sadness for these people because they'd been uprooted because they had voted for independence and democracy. And through that they paid with their lives, a lot of them, and their livelihoods, their houses, their families. And yeah, that was chilling as you moved west to the border, that I think there was only one house we'd seen in the whole country that had a roof on it still.
How can people ask a veteran about their service?
By asking them a simple question: did you serve? Where did you serve? And just an open-ended question like that. And then they will tell you, if they're comfortable, what their service was. How do you find that? You were telling me before that your Vietnam service.
No one ever asked for 40 years. You didn't tell anybody, and no one spoke about it. And the biggest thing in the last 10 years is people my age, in the odd occasion it comes up, they apologise. And they come up and they say, look, I was in a demonstration and I thought you'd done this and I apologise. And I say, don't apologise, because you thought you were doing the right thing to get us out of there, but in fact you were doing us enormous harm.
Yeah.
I can remember being on Courtney Hill in the night, and I read an article about 1 million people in Melbourne protesting about us being there, and it was extremely hurtful that you thought the Australian people weren't behind you. So hardly anyone's ever asked me.
Yeah.
You can mention it occasionally, you're a Vietnam veteran, but for 30, 40 years you didn't do it. If you're at a dinner party and it came up, you would just get treated dreadfully. It was so different. I'm delighted that you blokes and women are being treated differently, because war is such a tragic thing for everybody.
Oh, it's terrible.
There's a saying, Nikki Gemmell writes in The Australian, and she said a marvellous quote a couple of weeks ago. She said, if you hand a kid a gun and ask him to go and kill people, you owe him a tremendous debt, because what he did damaged his soul. Well, see, that sort of thought would never have occurred 30, 40 years ago, and I think it's so gratifying and relevant for you blokes that those feelings come out.
Yeah.
Because you deserve that support.
Oh, there's a lot more support nowadays. It's great. Very much so.
Lovely meeting you, and I hope we
Great
catch up
talking
a lot more.
Definitely.